All right, viewers and listeners, Assalamu alaikum warahmatullah. Good afternoon, good day. My name is Umar Isa Endago, and welcome to this exclusive interview I'm recording with Martine Dennis, an internationally renowned broadcaster and journalist whose career has spanned from the BBC, from LBC and the BBC, and later Al Jazeera English, where she has been seen, or she was seen when she was working for Al Jazeera English, interviewing world leaders, prominent global figures, and discussing interesting topics and contributing towards the betterment of our society. Thank you so very much indeed, Martin Dennis, for coming on the show.
Omar, it's very nice to meet you.
Very nice to meet you. I would like us to talk about your career a little bit, and then one of the most important aspect of our conversation, we'll look at how you got to interview the late former president of Nigeria, Muhammadu Buhari. Two times you interviewed him in 2015 before the election, and then in 2016, physically after the election, when he was like 1 year after the election, and we talked about serious issues. The first question I would like to ask you was how did you find talking to Muhammadu Buhari at that time?
Well, the first time when he was a candidate in 2015, um, that was down the line. So we weren't in the same room. He was on a satellite link. I think he was actually in Abuja and
Yep.
I was in Denver. And without wanting to sound unkind, there are certain people who are very good communicators and there are those that aren't. Muhammadu Buhari, I found not to be a great communicator. I think he really did not enjoy it. I don't think leaders generally don't like being quizzed by nosy reporters anyway, especially foreign ones, because we don't follow the rules. So he particularly did not enjoy being subjected to this form of quite rigorous questioning. But so as a candidate in 2015, down the line, he was okay. I mean, he answered the questions, but there was very little chemistry, if you like. Then come 2016, and about 9 months after the election, I think it was, and we were face to face in the same room. And again, I found him to be really just perfunctory in terms of his answers. I found him to be a little bit guarded to begin with, and then a little bit annoyed, actually a little bit annoyed with me for pressing him on certain issues. For instance, I don't know if you'll remember this time, Umar, because you were quite young, but the fact is that everything, I mean, the economy was spiraling out of control. And I put it to him that there were many people having to take their children out of school because they couldn't afford the fees anymore. And he said, basically, he said, tough luck. I said, but what about you and your children? He said, well, if you can't afford it, you can't afford it. So he was incredibly dismissive, I found, of other people's discomfiture. So I found him to be quite aloof, I think is probably the best word.
Okay. Let me ask you this question. Okay, you've talked about the differences between him when he was a candidate in 2015 and him when he was the president, at least 1 year after the interview. I think that was the time when he wanted to pick up a tablet or an iPad or something to show him a video, and he said,
Yeah.
"No, thank you." Right? Is that what he said?
Yeah, well, that was, I mean, maybe that was a little bit cheeky of me, actually, because it was unverifiable video, but I'd been seeing quite a lot of it, a lot of unrest that was going on in Abia. And then hearing about this growing, what seemed to be a growing movement of these Biafrans, young people who were agitating for, a separate entity again. So I wanted to show him the video, and he wouldn't have it at all. But then I put it in the edit afterwards. I put it in to explain to the viewer what I was trying to bring to the attention of the president. And as you know from the interview, I mean, he wasn't interested at all in any form of dialogue or even addressing the issue. As you all also know, of course, he'd taken
Yeah.
part in the Biafran War and was very mindful of the fact that 2 million lives had been lost during that terrible war.
Yeah. Don't you think that you shouldn't have brought that up in the manner that you did, simply because of the sensitivity and lack of evidence around the video that you wanted to put it out to him at that time?
No, well, I don't think. I think, as I said, it was. I made it quite clear it was unverifiable. I think that if you're not um, courageous, you're not going to get anywhere as a journalist. You have to push boundaries, I believe. It was well within the bounds of the conversation. In terms, we were talking about different areas of unrest in the country. He was insistent that he was doing very well when it came to Boko Haram, and I went and said, well, what about this that's going on? Because it had been all over social media at the time, and so to get his view and response on that. Had I been his communications strategist, I would have advised him on that. He should have been prepared for all sorts of things. And I mean, his comms team, I knew them, and they were very nice chaps. But I don't think he was terribly well prepared by them.
Okay. And what did you feel a little bit embarrassed when he turned down that offer of yours to show him the video? Because it was like,
No, embarrassment, no, not at all.
okay.
No, I think I think I've done my job. I think we always have to, as I say, I think we as journalists have to push a little bit. And if we don't succeed, we don't succeed. But quite often, it's as important that you are seen to be asking the question. It's as important that you're seen to be asking the question as the replies, really.
Okay.
Sometimes you won't get a reply, but you'll probably know if you're doorstepping somebody, you'll shout, Mr. President, Mr. President, what are you going to do next week? Are you going to send weapons to Ukraine? He might say nothing and get on his airplane or get on his helicopter, but you have asked the question, and that is sometimes as important as the answer or lack of answer.
If you were to be a Nigerian journalist now, how would you cover his death? What would you do, for example, at least for the people, for example, to honor him or something?
Um, well, if I were a Nigerian journalist, I'd have a completely different head on my shoulders, wouldn't I? I was recently in Nigeria.
Yeah,
As you know, I was in
yeah,
Abuja and Lagos, and
yeah. Interviewing Peter Obi, I saw that incredible interview, and I'm
yes,
looking forward to seeing you back in Abuja because I'm currently based in Abuja. Uh,
right.
yeah,
We'll see about that, Omar. Well, I think, the passing of a former leader is always a matter of national importance. It's a moment not only to reflect upon the person, but it's a moment to reflect upon the progress of the country as a whole, I think. And I think that there are 7 days of national mourning.
yeah.
President Tinubu has
Mm.
decreed. Fine. So that gives the whole country, a moment to reflect, I think. And I think that's perfectly fitting. There will be those who are pro Buhari, those who are anti Buhari, because he had faults, but also he had some good points as well. So this is also a moment in which those assets, if you like, can be compared and contrasted. But most importantly, I would imagine for Nigerians, all Nigerians, this is a moment of deep reflection as to where the country is, where they would like it to go for the future. Because of course you're gearing up. You're in election season again. You've got elections in just 22 months.
Yeah.
So this is a very, very apposite moment for that kind of conversation to be had among all elements of society.
Yeah, definitely. I was having a debate earlier with my producer, with my boss, earlier today, this morning, about neutrality and activism in journalism. For example, there's this debate, as you know, that are we just reporters? Are we supposed to be on a neutral ground reporting what person A and person B say? and so on and so forth? Or are we supposed to be involved in the stories that we're covering? This is a very serious issue with regards to, especially given the fact that you have worked for both the BBC, which claims quote unquote impartiality and neutrality, and Al Jazeera, which sort of projects itself as a pro-Palestinian activist, for example, championing one
Mm,
section
mm.
of like.
Yeah, it's a very interesting it's a very interesting conundrum, really, particularly at this moment in time, because of the rise of the internet, pretty much, and social media, where there is unguarded, unverified information out there by the bucket load. I think you can choose these days, frankly speaking. I mean, I'm old school. I believe in impartiality. I'm not an activist. But I do believe that there are journalists today who are quite clearly campaigning from a particular point of view. And I think it's fine as long as you know that.
Mhm.
I think so. I think there are different types of journalists these days. And I wouldn't necessarily exclude those who are activists, but I think you have to know. The BBC does or always has prided itself on a certain impartiality, but and I've said this before, it is impossible to be completely objective. If you're sitting in London and you're broadcasting, then you have a particular point of view. If you're sitting in Doha, as I was for Al Jazeera, you tend to have a certain point of view. You see the world with different eyes, through a different prism, depending on where you are in the world. I mean, it's inevitable. And I think we should be totally cognizant of that.
Okay. Should we be activists?
Well, as I said, I think it's a question for each and every one of us. There is space, I do believe, these days for journalists who take a particular issue. For instance, climate. There in the climate space, there are a lot of people doing very, very good journalistic work, but clearly they have a point of view. And then, so climate is one. The Palestinian issue is one of the most polarizing issues at the moment, as you know, particularly in the United States. I recently interviewed an African PhD student who was at Cornell in the United States, who was threatened with deportation because of his pro-Palestinian activism.
Mhm.
Okay, he's not a journalist as such, but nonetheless, pro-Palestinian activism or even that point of view is being penalized in the United States. So it must be very, very difficult to operate as a journalist in America at the moment.
So there should be a voice for such people who are sort of marginalized because of their own stance on these controversial issues.
Well, if you want to take up the cause of, say, the Palestinian people, which is a completely understandable impulse on the part of many of us, then fine. I've never been a campaigning journalist, but there is space, I believe, for journalists who campaign on a particular issue and from a particular point of view. I believe that there is space.
What can you say about global arena and some of the things that
Yeah,
have
it's great.
happened?
It's great. You're doing well, Omar. You're doing really well. You've got to keep up the work. You've got to keep producing content no matter what. You've got to keep at it. If you really want to work in this industry, which is more and more complicated as the years go by. But yeah, it's great. You're doing really well. So congratulations.
Thank you so very much indeed. I'm looking forward to having you very soon again to talk about your own programs and the YouTube channel, the podcast that you've been producing. And thank you very much indeed, Martine Dennis, for speaking to me. I really appreciate it.
Okay, Omar. Bye-bye.
Bye bye. Take care.